Bowling Green has a new head coach, and you know if we're leading a podcast with that, he must be a really big deal. Some spring visits along the way and a way too early peek at the college football playoff. This is the College Game Day podcast. We are recording on Tuesday, March 11th. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, and Bill Connelly here. Bill, we're going to talk extensively about your early college football playoff projections. And as we were leading up to recording this podcast, you said you were at the stage of the offseason in which you might argue with yourself. So we'll see if we can split screen that. And Pete and I will just stand back and enjoy that moment of mental dexterity that you will have to display. And Pete, let's start with the story that you were working on over the weekend and that you and I talked about as it was unfolding. Bowling Green hiring Eddie George as head coach there. Now, Bowling Green has an extensive history of hiring coaches who go on to do bigger and better things in terms of higher profile jobs. Urban Meyer was the coach there. Dave Clawson was the coach there. Dino Babers. And then most recently, Scott Loeffler, who went to the NFL as an assistant. Loeffler was the guy that they were pleased with at Bowling Green, but he decided to make a change. And Bowling Green kind of took the approach of, if we're going to survive and maybe be part of this next iteration of college football, whatever that might look like in the future, we've got to gas this thing up a little bit. And so they tried to broaden their horizons in their search. And they landed with a former Heisman Trophy winner who'd been coaching at Tennessee State and had done a nice job there and really made a bit of a splashy hire considering the time of the year on the calendar that it was made and playing in the MAC.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's a combination of name recognition combined with work. And I think that's really important when you talk about what Eddie George has accomplished to get to this point. He took Tennessee State to the FCS playoffs last year in his fourth season. He had a winning record in his third season. They split the conference title this season. It was the first time at that school they'd won a league title since 1999. I don't think they'd been to the FCS playoffs since 2013. So he went to what, by the metrics, would tell you was a pretty difficult job and overachieved there. It's a collision of two trends. One's the obvious one, right? High-profile players without a lot of coaching experience. I don't think Eddie had any traditional coaching experience when Tennessee State took him. Now, he has an MBA from Northwestern. He was an actor. He was an entrepreneur. He played a lot of high-level football. So, he wasn't just hanging out at Gold's Gym. He did a lot. It just wasn't there. So it's a collision of the Deion Sanders trend, right, that we've seen and we've seen repeated, combined with a more subtle trend that athletic directors are looking for coaches who have been head coaches, right? And we've seen more reaches in recent seasons into the FCS for that because the skill set of being a head coach now is even more radically different than it was 5 years ago, just in terms of roster management. I sound like our friend Seth Greenberg, roster construction, right? Just in terms of you really have to be comfortable stepping away from the ball and running the organization. And so Eddie George has the name recognition, the playing chops, and he has proven in a short period of time in a difficult job, he has the coaching chops. So he's the most interesting hire in the MAC right now. Look, you mentioned that Bowling Green is the Crayola coaches. In my career, Urban Meyer has left there and gone on to things. Dave Clawson has left there and gone on to good things. Dino Babers went on and did some good things at Syracuse. That's the best MAC job of this generation in terms of being an incubator. You could argue Scott Loeffler made 3 straight bowls and went to the NFL and has a pretty good job there. My last MAC coach observation before we send everyone to shut the podcast off. I believe, and Bill would correct me on this, Lance Leipold is the last MAC coach to leave for a power conference job when he went to Kansas late in the spring of 2021.
That's quite possible, yeah.
So the MAC it's just tough sledding there, man. There's no easy MAC jobs, and you gotta be a little different.
It is an incubator, Bill, for super dogs, because all you got to do is pick somebody that's that's coming off something emotional, or somebody's going on the road with an unusual kickoff time, something like that. But I really like the hire for Bowling Green. I believe in the time that we've done this podcast, this might be the only time we've talked about Bowling Green. As we mentioned, the coaches have gone on to success, but this is exactly what they need because first of all, Eddie's a good coach. He's a great guy. I'm very fond of Eddie. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, Pete, the success that he's had, while there is certainly name recognition that will benefit Bowling Green, and it should because Eddie has earned that, there's also a track record. He didn't just bounce into Tennessee State and go, this was fun for a couple of years, get back on the field and coach. He doesn't need this.
Yeah, I mean, the way coaching searches on the internet tend to work is, you find a name that's linked to your school, then you go look up his record, and you're like, 24-22 at Tennessee State. Like, what? This must just be a name thing,
Yeah.
At Tennessee State. That's looking through my little history of FCS SP Plus rankings. They're typically a school that ranks in the 70s and 80s, maybe 60s occasionally. But this past season, they were 33rd. Like that's not third or anything, but it's far above what they had been historically achieving. And he just learned as he went, and they got better just about every year. So that's a really nice trajectory. Also, I mean, the MAC needed a win. Like that's the biggest conclusion I've gotten as I put together my initial, returning production averages for the offseason and everything else is the MAC just got crushed to start this offseason in terms of, you already lost Tim Albin from Ohio. The conference winning coach, he went to Charlotte, which kind of reveals things about what he thought the ceiling for Ohio was, and that was pretty demoralizing to me at least. But then also my initial returning production figures, national average is 54% returning production this year, which is far lower than normal. But like the power conferences are sitting at 58, 59, 60%. The MAC was at 43.6%. Just every good player left the MAC this year.
So you think about we could just generally say 10 to 12% of MAC production is now gone because of the portal. I actually might have guessed more than that.
Well, it was pretty bad this offseason for sure. All the Rayon Straters of the world, the Miami cornerback who's awesome, he's gone. Just a lot of those guys left, and the MAC needed a win.
It is, but it's also, as we sort of veer off from the coaching thing, I mean, it's okay. I mean, people get up in arms and act like this is some type of atrocity. We mentioned all of those coaches who left Bowling Green for what they perceived to be better situations. Let's understand what it is. This level of college football is, in fact, double and triple A. It's developmental. Now, if guys want to stay, that's fantastic.
And it can work out for him, by the way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell.
Ashton Genty.
Yeah, there are a ton of guys.
Toledo's got a D tackle. It's going to be a top 100 pick this year.
Yeah, I mean, God bless them if they want to stay. That's fantastic if they want to stay and establish roots and develop those, 40-year, not 4-year types of things that guys do when they're around. But if they aspire to leave the MAC and play in the Big Ten, leave the MAC and play in the SEC or the Big 12. Well, good for them. I mean, coaches do that. And so I think I don't look at it as some type of existential crisis. It does, however, mean that you are going to exist differently. And you have to understand how to, here it comes again, take a shot, everybody, manage your roster and construct it. You have to understand that it's going to change. And, people say this more often in basketball than they do football, but I think it's becoming true in football. You are sort of building a team every year that you hope fits within your culture, but you're not really, I don't want to say you're not building a program because you are, but you're not, we're not planning for next year or the year after. You have to try to put it together to be the best it can right now, this year, because it is not going to be the same next year. And when that happens, you'll have to think differently. Bowling Green thought differently in their hire, and now Eddie, I imagine Eddie has some experience with this in his few years at Tennessee State. and he'll have to think differently in terms of construction. And it could be that the power of his personality and what kind of staff he puts together.
Right.
And, it might be that you have people who are more like Ashton Genty who decide, I like it here. I'm good. I can go to the NFL from here. And so it'll be a fascinating thing for sure.
You ever call the game at Bowling Green, Rece?
Yes, I have. In fact, they joke with me. You and I have a mutual friend, very close friend of mine, who is deeply invested in Bowling Green, and they joke that we are the reason. Mark May, Lou Holtz, and me, we are the reason that they have artificial turf, because we called a game in an absolute monsoon. I mean, you cannot believe the rain all day leading up to it, and night on a midweek action game. Played Miami, Ohio, and there was just standing water everywhere. I mean, you would have been much better served to try to play that game, on a paddleboard, rather than wearing cleats.
Poured into my veins.
Yeah, and I'll never forget. I will forget the guy's name because I don't remember the Miami, Ohio kicker's name. But I remember him daintily tiptoeing out around, trying to avoid puddles, dancing through like he was wearing, a new pair of Ferragamo shoes or something and not get them wet. Obviously, he didn't want to step in a big puddle and get his shoe all wet before he kicked what I think was the game-winning field goal. But after that, they put in field turf. So we get some of the credit for that and didn't even have to make a contribution.
The Rece Davis field turf.
Well, we were making sport of it. All three of us were. We were having, having a good time. This is the one, that, you know how much I love Holtz, right? I mean, Holtz is, like a family member to me, and he was calling the game with us. And that was the night, people got on him all the time because he always, used the full name of the institution. And sometimes if that wasn't quite right, he said it anyway. He famously or infamously said, I think University of Navy one time when he was coach at Notre Dame, and he had slipped up and said as he was, gathering his thoughts, University of USC. So one night we were doing that game actually, and I said, "Hey, coach," I said, just think of it this way. I said, you don't have to say the whole thing. Just say Bowling Green. It's that's enough. You don't have to say Bowling Green State University. So he's saying whatever he's saying in his opening, and he bookended it. He said the University of Bowling Green State University. Man, I lost it. It's funny, and he.
My main Bowling Green experience was watching Missouri get absolutely smoked there in 2002. Having to break up a fight between Missouri fans in the stands. It was a great time.
So you attended a game at Bowling Green as a fan, Bill.
Yes.
Your bona fides are real.
We were trying to tailgate beforehand, which doesn't it was not an extremely active thing. And a cop walked by and said, yeah, you can do this over here, blah, 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 but do not poop in the grass. And we were and we thought he was joking. And he's like, do not poop in the grass. And they drove off in his golf car. We're like, what happened?
Your reputation precedes you, Bill.
What happened that he thought he really needed to make sure we knew that rule? But we apparently just looked like the type. Apparently, I don't know.
Do you know? As we'll wrap up this Bowling Green talk. They have rivals in the MAC, and I think you guys know this. Toledo has a rocket that is strategically aimed. It's outside the glass bowl, and is strategically aimed, if launched, to hit the 50-yard line at Bowling Green's Deutsch Perry Stadium.
They don't like each other. No, it's that's real.
I mean, that's serious. Yeah. We talk about how Alabama and Auburn, Texas A&M don't like each other. Nobody's got a rocket aimed at the other guy.
Wish they had a little more money to keep at least a player or two, but I love the MAC.
Well, it's football midweek, so we all can enjoy that. Football in the postseason, Bill, is something that you've already looked at with your college football playoff way too early, top 25.
Why play the season, Bill? You already figured it out.
You said you might argue with yourself already.
Yes.
What would that look like? What would you be arguing about?
So, the week after the season ended, we of course wanted to flip things forward. Mark Schlabach has his way too early, and I wanted to do a playoff projection kind of thing to go with it. And I didn't have, I kind of knew what my SP Plus projections would eventually say, but it was going to take me a month to get there because the rosters take super long now. But before I even had any sort of information for future numbers, I just wanted to basically go through and create rules for each conference. Like, we know what's going to happen because here's what the kind of thing that usually happens. Like the SEC, it's going to either be Kirby Smart or it's going to be a coach who has previously proven he can beat Kirby Smart. That's who always wins the SEC. The Big Ten, not a little fun with the Big Ten. It's going to be basically won by the best team not named Ohio State. Big 12 is going to be won by whoever didn't win their close games last year because that just flips every single year. Which is bad news for Arizona State a little bit, but really good news for, Utah and Kansas. And just kind of look at it like that and just kind of create some rules and then argue with myself when I actually have the SP Plus numbers in front of me and I realize, okay, well, that's definitely wrong. This might hold up and so on and so forth.
The most interesting team to me would be North Carolina.
Yes.
Rece and I just watched the Tar Heels very poorly, by the way, because they did not have numbers or names on their jerseys. And while your humble correspondents do their best to know college football well, knowing the North Carolina roster by body type in early March would basically, the North Carolina coaches are about the only ones. I joked with a couple of them, I'm like, must be that easy to watch film. They're like, we're getting used to it. Why the heels? Why the footy optimism here in March?
Well, that was my favorite part of that piece, actually. I kind of walked through, like 6 of the at-large bids are probably going to go to teams in Schleyballs way too early. But I needed a spot for the Kurt Signetti Indiana Memorial transfers equals total transformation bid, and there weren't any incredibly obvious. Like Oklahoma was probably, if we're not just looking at first year coaches, Oklahoma was probably the most likely with John Mateer coming in and whatnot. Oklahoma's not any fun at all. Oklahoma's not Indiana. That's not a fun team to pick. So once I eliminated that, didn't have a lot to choose from. Went with North Carolina because I realized it gave me a chance to set up a Bill Belichick versus Manning playoff game in the first round. With 11 seeded North Carolina facing number 6 Texas. So that once I realized all the poetry adding up there, I went with North Carolina. Because you're not going to see it. The whole point is you're not going to see Indiana coming. So therefore, it has to be somebody that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I love that you did that. What do your numbers say? Because conspicuous by their absence, the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, that was the ACC champion was either Clemson or a team that beats Clemson in the regular season in that piece. And so it ended up it wasn't going to be, since I'd already picked Georgia to win again, it wasn't going to be any fun to pick Clemson. So I went with Louisville. But no, I think that's if we're starting off the hierarchy in the offseason, obviously, Clemson starts at the top. They won it last year, but then also they just, they return. They're number one nationally in returning production. That number isn't as high as the number one team typically is because everybody's losing more now, it feels like. But they still start off 11th, top 10 offense. We just got this little peak at Texas or against Texas where suddenly they're completing long passes again and making explosive plays. And if that's the Clemson we see, then the upside's a lot harder than 11th. It's just I think we have to see it a little bit more, and we need to see an elite defense there again because it's been good for a while. It hasn't been like phenomenal for a few years now, and obviously he knew that and brought in a named defensive coordinator to kind of change that. But to me, like upside is, there's no question they start off with the most upside.
Pete, if I had to do, which I don't, but if I had to do a way too early top 25, I would have Clemson. I think Clemson or Penn State number 1.
Rece, why do you hate the SEC? We talk about this all the time. I mean, it's really an ESPN bias against the SEC, Rece.
Yeah,
you're really perpetuating that.
I know. It's really a shame, isn't it?
So when Klubnik came back, I tweeted, I think Clemson's a top 5 team next season. And someone on Twitter said, top 5 in the ACC. I was like, wait a minute, am I that far off here? Like, you look at what they have on the defensive line, especially what they have at corner, what they have at O-line, I think is really important. Obviously, we spent a lot of offseason time on this podcast talking about O-line returning production and depth.
And that's been a problem for Clemson.
Correct.
A relative problem. even when they won national championships. I don't know that even those national championship teams, you looked at it and said, man, that offensive line. It was always sort of the playmakers compensating for a good offensive line. I'm not saying they were bad. Don't want Eric McLean mad at me or anything like that. But I'm not saying they were bad. They weren't. But I mean, like, overwhelmingly dominant first-round picks. I don't think that was
They just
them.
weren't that. They weren't. It's very simple. They were not that. Because I did all those title games. Scouts break them down, and they'd be like, the guards are a little shaky. And, yes, they did not have this, like, assembly line of maulers at tackle. Like we've seen at Notre Dame, for example. Like, it's like you're left tackle at Notre Dame, you're going to be a first round pick the last 5 years. And there's other examples of that too. Very recently, we've seen Texas all of a sudden take a turn there, right? They went from no first round picks to all of a sudden, churning them out.
I don't know if I can talk myself into top 5 for Clemson, but this is a clear, like, just a ceiling defining season for that program, because they have, like I was saying about the defense, they've been obviously good, but they haven't been title worthy in a while. And, in this kind of new era where he's actually taken on transfers, all 3 of them or whatever. Should help that defensive line, that pass rush nicely. But, in this era, this will kind of help us decide or determine, what are they capable of? Are they capable of, obviously they're capable of making the playoff. How many games are they capable of winning in this expanded playoff? This will tell us a lot.
Pete, you visited a couple of playoff teams from a year ago, recently, in fairly recent days, Notre Dame and Indiana. What stuck out about those 2 trips?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to ask Bill one more thing while we're talking a little bit of, like, the South and SEC.
You're just like the game day guys. Not gonna do what I'm supposed to do. Just gonna go in any direction I want.
Bill, did you get in a little kerfuffle with Greg Sankey?
I don't think so. Not directly.
Okay. All right. Just want to be sure.
We were on the same episode of Feinbaum, and they knew exactly what they're doing. I just put up a piece saying 4-4-2-2-1-1 is stupid. And go ahead and skip 14. If you're going to expand, go to 16. And
wait, are you saying Paul set that up on purpose? I'd just be shocked.
I was
Bill.
as shocked as anybody that he would do that.
You think Paul takes 2 divisive opinions and lets them meet in the middle, and then he just steps away and lets everybody hash it out? You think that's how he operates?
No, that's I did notice that I was programmed to lead the show, and then as he was asking me, "What are your thoughts on this playoff stuff?" He was like, "And realize there are SEC offices with this on the televisions, and Greg Sankey is going to be on later today." So I simply said that you've got all the advantages already. You've got the names. You're going to we expand to 14, 16. You're going to get 4 or 5 every single year. Just about let it play out. You don't have to legislate that you get this many. It's going to look to people like you're rigging it when you don't have to. So do not. And that was
Bill, I agree with you. And I understand from deep intel sources that my take on it has not been greeted warmly in Big Ten, in the Big Ten commissioner's office. So, here's the thing. I want to acknowledge, I do think that there are upsides to it.
Yeah.
And here are the upsides. The upsides are that you're just playing for it like you do in the NFL. The upsides are, if you are creative, that you are creating more than one meaningful game on Championship Saturday if you do these play-in games that some people have kicked around. So I get that. And you take out the guesswork, you take out the how in the world did SMU get in? And then the flip side of that is, how did you even consider Alabama? They got killed by Oklahoma.
Right.
What do you mean? I mean, you guys overlooked. You didn't even notice Ole Miss. They were better than all of them. And what about Miami? You get rid of all of that. Yeah. I understand the value in that. You also protect yourself from SMU. I'm not saying people can debate later if they want to whether they were deserving, but you protect yourself, or I won't even say deserving, if they were good enough, if they should have been in. You protect yourself from playing a lesser schedule and getting a committee to go, they won 11 games, they lost on a field goal. You get rid of all of that. I see the upside.
Yeah.
But I think the downside is more along the lines of what you and I are saying, is that you make it look like an invitational instead of a pure playoff. You look exclusionary, even if you aren't, Because let's be honest, almost every time the Big Ten and the SEC are going to get that number of bids, if not more. Yeah. And I also think that it's also bad because there are some years, and this year was almost one of them, this past year, the ACC didn't need 2 bids. Big 12 sure didn't. So it's like, but there might be years where they need 3. So locking yourself in like that is my objection to it. But I do see the upside. I see the upside of like, it's professionalized. These 2 leagues, not that every single team in those leagues can beat every single team in the other ones. I'm not saying that, but they are different. There is a separation there, and you want to protect that. I understand all of that.
Yeah,
but I don't know. The downside seems greater than the upside to me to doing the guaranteed bids for each conference, regardless of how those conferences and those teams might perform.
And it's funny, as I was sketching out that piece, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge, like, I understand, number one, the playing games, you could have a TV spectacle, and you could have, and so on. And so I got that part of it. And then I started thinking about it and ended up putting it in the piece too. Playing games, like when we expanded to 12, there was anybody who was skeptical of the idea was probably bringing up, the integrity of the regular season. We're making, losses don't mean as much and so on. And my point was always, we're going to make like 4 games mean a little bit less and then a whole bunch of games mean more. And that's a net win and so on and so forth. And I thought that kind of played out that way. But it was
won't
great.
Every year. Some years it won't. And that's the beauty of this sport. And everybody tries to find the formula that is going to alleviate every potential thing. There will be some years,
right?
Because you know what, your playoff piece is a perfect example. Now I know that Ohio State and Michigan, Ohio State ended up winning the national championship anyway. If memory serves, you've got them playing again. You've got them turning around and playing again in the 8-9 game. So you're going to have some years like that when it's going to seem like So
well. And so, Ohio State, Michigan was a good example of the difference now. Just this past year, like Michigan, that game still meant a ton. It still lit Columbus on fire for about 3 weeks. Michigan fans sure did enjoy having beaten Ohio State and being able to point to that. But then Ohio State still got to win the title, and that was the trade-off, I guess. But regardless, I started thinking about it. Like, if we're really concerned about the integrity of the regular season, this past year, Indiana would have gone 11-1. And then had to host Iowa to make the playoff. And Iowa, 8-4 Iowa is a couple breaks and an upset away from negating most of the regular season and sneaking in the back door and keeping Indiana out. And that feels like a bigger threat than anything else to me. But anyway, like I wanted to acknowledge that there was a draw, and I understood why they wanted to go down that road. And then I was like, wait a second, no, that would stink too. And
but it's because you can't make anything perfectly, guys.
Right.
And your example is a great one. You may have a year in whatever league, Big Ten or the SEC, in which for whatever reason, I'll use SEC basketball as an example from this year. You've got what, four of the top 6, I guess, with Auburn, Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee. Those are 4 of the best 6 teams in the country. Well, they're going to this SEC tournament. If this were a play-in situation, all of those teams are going to have really challenging games in the quarterfinals. Well, those 4 teams have done much better than the other teams ranked well below them.
Yeah.
That could be even amplified in football if you have 3 teams who have set themselves apart. Maybe they all beat each other, but whacked everybody else all season, right? And then you get 3-6 games and things happen. And your Iowa-Indiana example is a great one. And then people will be up in arms about that too. Others will go, that's playoff football, and I love that.
Sure.
And that's true too. It will be entertaining. I don't want this to be misconstrued as me saying this would be the worst thing ever. There will be some entertaining aspects about it because people like upsets and the frustrations of a team that is a national championship worthy team that somehow gets derailed, whether in the current system in a conference championship game or in this upcoming one, if it in fact plays out this way in play-in games. That'll be fascinating theater and provide storylines for the offseason and motivation for the following season. What collectively as the sport that needs to be decided, is it best? Is it best practice or is it appeasing various entities? And they need to direct it toward best practice. There will be no perfect practice. There will be nothing that is. This is absolutely the very best way to do a playoff. They need to find the best practice and not say, okay, what are we going to do to appease, the Mountain West? Geez, I don't know. The ACC is going to get mad if we do that. They need to get away from that. Best practice. Yeah. And whatever that is, I hope we can all get behind it, and it gives everybody the opportunity that they earn. Not handing out berths. What you earn, and hopefully that's the way it'll be.
That was a good hijack, wasn't it? Usually my hijacks are like self-indulgent and goofy. That was actually it's a pretty robust conversation that came out of that. I'm going to put a coda on it by saying this, Rece and Bill. The sport is going in a direction where the top two leagues are pulling away. That is the way the sport is going. That's where the money's going. Follow the TV contracts, follow the championships. It's going that way. Very comfortable with that. That's just the gravity, the financial gravity of the reality. And again, I'm not opposed to this system, I'm going to lie down the street against it. What irks me about this is this systemically places a separation between everybody else. Yes. I like the sport as a beautiful mud pit, right? A beautifully imperfect mud pit. The reason why this sport is so great is because it's just far-flung and ridiculous, and everybody's it's like WrestleMania. Everybody's kind of in the ring, and you figure out at the end who's in the ring, right? So do we need – financially, those two leagues have separated themselves, and they should do their jobs and follow suit and continue to separate themselves as TV contracts go and maybe super leagues go and whatever. I don't think the playoff needs to separate them. They have already separated themselves by play on the field and by calling up their bank accounts. So that's it. Again, I'm not I'm dramatically opposed to it all. I just feel like that distinction doesn't need to be made. Like Rece said, they're going to get their teams in.
Yeah, no. As a friend of mine put it, we're already living in the Super League. This is what it looks like. The gates just slowly getting. Then we don't need. But college football does have this issue sometimes where we. Because it's so different. Everything about it is just so different from the way the impact of, how the money is raised, and the fact that it's 18 to 22-year-old males in a pointy ball that bounces in stupid ways. We have all these things that are just, it's always going to be different. But it feels like sometimes because of that, we think that everything college football does has to be different. We can't just look at basically every other playoff that exists at every other level of every other sport where, it's basically you qualify this way or that way. And then we have 1 versus 16 and 8 versus 9. And it feels like we can't do the obvious thing. We've got to figure out a way that only college football could do it. And that's how you get 4-4-2-2, 1-1 instead of just, hey, let's have 16 teams in the playoff and now let's go.
That's the thing, the argument I've always made, and I'm around with you, Bill. I would prefer 16 no buys if we're already at an expanded playoff to that level. The argument that I've made in the past, or at least maybe, I don't know if not an argument, at least a point that I've brought up, is I always go back to the 2010 season where Auburn won the national championship and Cam Newton was brilliant. And they had Cam Newton and Nick Fairley, and they had some other good players, but those guys were so transcendent, particularly Cam, that he sort of carried them to victory. Okay, you have a 16-team playoff with that, and Auburn ended up winning the national championship pre-playoff. They just won the BCS national championship game. What if they play a 4-loss Troy team because you have 16, and Cam has a high ankle sprain? Well, now you instead of it being a playoff, what you've done is you've thrown a banana peel in the path of the teams who have been best over the course of the season. That's the downside, but we're already there at 12. Right. In a lot of ways, because we threw a banana peel at Oregon, a banana peel in terms of what was the best team in Ohio State in their first playoff game because of the way we had everything structured. So I guess that's just part of it, and it'll always be that way, and you can't avoid it. But there is part of me that goes, as we expand, we get to the level of what we're going to see over the next few weeks. And that is, in March Madness, the best team typically doesn't win the national championship. The team that happens to get the right path, that plays the best at the right time. Now, the last 2 years, even though I know UConn wasn't a 1 seed 2 years ago, but they were the best team. And not just because they won the tournament. By the end of the season, you could watch them and say, well, I think that there might have been a 4, Pete. I can't remember, but whatever they were.
They were, Rece.
Yeah, whatever you looked at, you're like, well, that's ridiculous. They're the best team. And so sometimes the best team does win, than UConn has the last 2 years. But most years, no. Most years it's not the best team. And it's the team that plays the best, which is a distinction with a slight difference most of the time, I think. So like last year in football, probably when all was said and done, Ohio State was the best team who also played the best once the playoffs started.
Right.
But it's, I do worry about, not worry about, but it's like, this is another thing that we're going to give up. We had an entire season build to a small number of games, which almost guaranteed by definition the size of the field that you weren't going to get just the hot team. But there's appeal to the hot team too. There is an appeal to teams playing their best ball at the end, going on a run, finding a cause, pulling together, trying to win a championship. That's dramatic and compelling too. We're just going to have to reorient the way we think about it.
Yeah, it's a tournament. There's no, it's, the 4-team CFP was an extra game that we basically tacked on. And, we rearranged things slightly about how the games were determined, but it was an extra game. Now it's an actual tournament and, with everything that comes with that.
So, Pete, unhijack this thing. What did you learn in Indiana and Notre Dame? Are they going to come in and try to hijack the tournament again, as Notre Dame did to a degree, although I think we all thought Notre Dame was pretty good. And then Indiana, Indiana made it to the playoff last year.
Yeah, so two good visits. I went to the Combine and popped up Rece and saw those two schools. Notre Dame, I'll start there because I went there first. It was interesting, the dichotomy between the appreciation of the run and the heartbreak of the end, right? And how that's going to be, kind of be fuel for them going forward. And I'm there a couple of weeks before spring starts, kind of right in the heart of offseason conditioning mode. And, the challenge that Marcus Freeman has is obviously sort of resetting this team and in toughness and everything else, and just acknowledging that nothing that happened last year is going to translate to this year. He did have a cool observation that I think you'd appreciate, Rece, because you were there that very, very cold night. And we did a very, very long television show before it. I said, what's going to be your memory 10 years from now when you think back to the first home playoff game at Notre Dame? And he said the walk from the Basilica to the stadium. He said it was basically like pitch dark. Now, not pitch dark. There was lights on campus, but it was particularly dark that night, particularly cold. They usually aren't walking in December darkness to, over from there. And this is what Marcus said to me. He said it was wild. It was almost like being in a movie. You're walking a stadium. He said it's just a very vivid moment that he remembered. And they see the lights of the GameDay set, and then you see the lights of Notre Dame Stadium, and then you see the crowd start to swell around. Everything got built, and I thought that was kind of a cool moment. One of my favorite things, Rece, about these sort of early spring trips that I try to do every year is you kind of meet and get to know some of the future players, future faces of the sport. And I sat down with right tackle Emil Wagner, and I sat down with Leonard Moore, who was the really breakout star freshman corner who filled in for Ben Morrison pretty seamlessly, which is crazy to say because Ben Morrison, was on track to be a high first round pick. He had an injury. I don't know if he's going to be quite that high, but whatever. He was a dominant top 3 position player in his sport last year, and Leonard Moore did that. Leonard Moore's dad teaches a history of college football class at the University of Texas, Rece.
Is that right?
That is right. That is right.
Can we take that online?
I would love to.
I wonder if he teaches it. There's a book, I've forgotten the author's first name. I think it's Watterson is his last name. It's like this thick. It's where I got some of the stories that people are like, the story that I've told a couple of times on Game Day when people throw up their arms about players transferring. And out of that history book is the story of Oregon playing 5 consecutive weeks and playing the same star player each week, playing for 5 different teams because he kept getting the ante was up each time. And this was, back in the early 1900s. So this idea of transfer and player payment, this is not a new thing. That would be fascinating. That's awesome. That's all we need to do.
Yeah, it was very, it was very cool. And one of the things that's really awesome about this, you meet like the next faces of the sport, and these are impressive young men who are accomplished, thoughtful, funny, insightful. It was a really good hour at the Notre Dame football. I was just talking to those guys and getting to know them. Yeah, like it's always funny to go to a place that's overachieved a little bit, right? Because there's a little bit of like found money, and so Marcus's focus as any coach is to like reset the culture, and they've accomplished nothing. He said basically we put last season away, and we've pushed on. Most notably, they're going to have a quarterback controversy for the first time, I guess, in 3 seasons. When you look at what they have back, Marcus was great. He was like, "We don't win the Penn State game without Steve Angeli, right? Like Angeli. It's Angeli, Rece. You're the pronunciation.
It's Angeli, yeah,
Angeli, yeah, because they have the peanut butter jelly time thing. Steve Angeli. He came in at the end of that first half and it really slung the rock and gave them some juice that set the tone for that comeback. They obviously have CJ Carr, the grandson of national championship Michigan coach Lloyd Carr. He's one of the bigger recruits they've got there during Freeman's time. He's impressed people with his with his poise. One thing Freeman said was he had an elbow injury last year, 2 seasons ago, and they noticed the scout team was discernibly down. They lacked energy when he was not running it. So he's made an impact in the program behind the scenes, and there's a lot of optimism around he and Kenny Minchie going forward. It's going to be a good race. They are excited about that. So that was that was South Bend.
Can I tell you one thing about CJ Carr, who I think is going to be terrific?
Yeah,
rough night last night. Tough night in EA Sports College Football 27, facing the aspiring, burgeoning Georgia Tech Dynasty home game for CJ and the Fighting Irish. But Georgia Tech went in there, got a big victory against the top 5 Notre Dame team, absolutely shut down CJ and his offense. And so the Rambling Wreck rolls on in Dynasty mode.
You played the game, Rece?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
My son Christopher and I are doing a Dynasty mode. Okay. And we alternate possessions each one. He's far better at the game than I am, by the way. So I absolutely kill him sometimes by putting him in very difficult spots. With often, I've not been delivered from pick sixes. Let's put it that way. So, but anyway, we go in there and we have a really good game plan and we take down the Irish. But we didn't choose Georgia Tech. We started our career at San Jose State. And we put together a really good season at San Jose State, got an offer to go after 1 year to Georgia Tech. I know it was really tough to, someone take a chance on a young coach like us at San Jose State and to leave immediately for Georgia Tech. But we did, and it's worked out on the flats. We've improved our recruiting. We got a couple quarterbacks coming in next year, but right now we're spinning the magic beam with 6'7", 240-pound Graham Knowles. So we've done a good job in the portal. Got a good JUCO running back. It's been very productive for us, and so things are good. Now Butch Jones did upset us on opening day, largely because of one of the pick sixes that I mentioned earlier. But we bounced back and haven't lost since. In this, I believe it's the 27 season that we're on right now.
I wish I played it more.
Bill writes like 17 stories a week because he does like random like analytic soccer breakdowns of like obscure D-League bungle dishes. So I don't think Bill has any free time.
Throwing the book in there, I had to finish that by January 31st.
When's the book coming out, Bill? Tell us about the book.
The goal is August. That's why I had to finish it like right after the season ended, which was not optimal from any sort of logistical standpoint. But the goal is August, and it's how did we get here? Where are we going? There's essays on all the different things that are taking us where we're going. So
maybe Leonard Moore's dad can use it in his class.
Yeah, I have a connection, so I'll make sure that happens. It's called Forward Progress. That was the best football term I could cram into the title. Thought it made a decent amount of sense there.
Did you consider illegal procedure?
I had to decide because if it's a football term, it's either positive or negative. And the whole kind of the point as I was walking through here is you've got kind of good and bad forces taking the sport where it's going right now. So I didn't really know which way to go there. And I didn't want to do like forward progress with a question mark. So it's like forward progress, the definitive guide to the future of college football.
I know my favorite football term is sugar huddle.
We need to call Dr. Moore and find out where that originated. We know what it is, but who started calling it that?
I looked that up at one point because it was when Venables and Clemson and the alleged legal sign stealing, I should say.
Yeah.
We need to clarify that now. Were happening, and that was like a term where we're like, yeah, we're going to sugar huddle against them. Sugar huddle.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just
and what
quick
did you come
huddle,
up with?
by the way. I don't remember. It was like 7 years ago, and a lot of useless information has sifted through my brain then.
All right. That's the class's assignment on the College Game Day Pod, or loyal listeners. If you know the definitive origin, and I will wager that we will get at least a half dozen different people claiming to know the origin of the phrase sugar huddle for the quick huddle.
I hope it was
that's your assignment.
Sugar huddle.
That's your assignment to send it in to us. Guys, this was fun. Enjoyed it. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day Podcast. We urge you to subscribe. We will be talking a little tournament and selection Sunday. Whether I'm involved in that remains to be seen, but Pete and Jeff Borzello might be able to handle that and tell you how to fill out your bracket, win the competition, perhaps win some money. And of course, you can always download each and every edition of the College Game Day Podcast wherever you prefer to buy your podcast. And one parting shot. It's not an official sponsorship. Pre-order Forward Progress just as soon as it's available on your favorite book dealer, and do the same thing with EA Sports College Football 26 because that's coming out this summer too. See ya.